The letter arrived on a Wednesday, the third letter, from the third department. Sophie Marchand had been trying to open a food processing facility in the Auvergne region for 31 months. She was 41, a trained agronomist who had spent 8 years working for a multinational in Zurich before deciding to come home, to her grandmother's village, to the volcanic plateau of central France, to the idea that someone should be turning the extraordinary lentils and cheeses and herbs grown within 20 kilometers of her childhood into something the world would pay for. The business plan was solid. The investors were patient. The land was hers. The product was real. The paperwork was infinite. Environmental impact assessment, 6 months. Agricultural land reclassification, 8 months. Regional development approval, pending. Fire safety inspection, scheduled, then rescheduled, then assigned to a different department that had not been notified of the original scheduling. The building permit had been approved, then appealed by a neighboring commune on grounds that Sophie's lawyer described, in a moment of rare professional candor, as not entirely without legal basis, but also not entirely serious. In Switzerland, she said, this would have taken 4 months. I know because I watch colleagues do it. She paused. Outside, the Auvergne Plateau stretched to the horizon, ancient, volcanic, extraordinarily beautiful, producing food of a quality that chefs in Paris and London and Tokyo will pay almost anything for. I'm not angry, she said. I'm past angry. Now I'm just curious. How does a country this capable make it this hard to do something this obvious? It is a fair question, and the answer, the real answer, which goes far deeper than permit offices and reclassification procedures, is one of the most interesting stories in European economics. Because France is not a failing country. It is not even a struggling one by most of the measures that matter. It is, quietly and somewhat despite itself, one of the most strategically powerful economies on Earth. It controls technologies and resources and institutions that its rivals cannot easily replicate. It produces things the world genuinely cannot do without. It simply makes this extraordinarily difficult to see, including sometimes for the French themselves. This is a film about what France actually is, underneath the strikes and the bureaucracy and the existential self-doubt, about the hidden architecture of a country that has been written off so many times it has stopped taking the predictions seriously, and about why, in a century that is going to reward exactly the things France has spent decades building, the world may be about to discover that it has been underestimating the wrong country. To understand France, you have to understand a choice that France made roughly 70 years ago and has never fully reversed. A choice that most other advanced economies made differently, and that is now turning out, in ways no one entirely predicted, to have been more prescient than it looked. France bet on the state, not in the way that socialist economies bet on the state, not the command economy, not the abolition of the market. Something more particular than that. France decided in the post-war decades that certain strategic domains were too important to leave entirely to the market. Energy, transport infrastructure, defense, aerospace, nuclear technology, agricultural policy, the grandes écoles that produce the engineers and administrators who run the system. France built institutions in each of these domains, institutions that were large, long-term in their thinking, technically excellent, and directly connected to state power in ways that most of the Anglo-American world considered, by the 1980s and 1990s, to be hopelessly antiquated. While Britain was privatizing its utilities, and the United States was deregulating its financial sector, and Germany was trusting its industrial base to the discipline of competitive markets, France kept building its state capacity, and it kept training, inside its grandes écoles and its public research institutions, a technocratic class whose primary loyalty was not to any single company or political party, but to the French state as a long-term project. This looked, for a long time, like stubborn statism, like a country that had not read the right economists, like the intellectual residue of Colbertism, the 17th century mercantilist doctrine that still haunts French economic policy in the way that other countries are haunted by other ghosts. But then history changed. The pandemic made supply chains visible as strategic vulnerabilities for the first time in a generation. The energy crisis made electricity prices a geopolitical weapon. The semiconductor shortage made industrial policy fashionable in Washington and Brussels. The climate transition made nuclear power, which France had never abandoned, newly relevant. The defense shock of 2022 made military-industrial capacity suddenly, urgently important in a way that politicians across the continent had forgotten to plan for. And France, almost without trying, found that it had most of what the new era required. The state had never stopped. It had simply been waiting for the world to catch up. France does not shout about what it makes. It tends to present itself to the world through cuisine and culture and political philosophy, through the Louvre and the Tour de France and the Cannes Film Festival, and a certain hauteur about the proper relationship between humanity and cheese. The actual industrial architecture of the country tends to be described, when it is described at all, in tones of mild apology. This is a significant miscommunication, because what France actually produces, in three domains in particular, is not peripheral to the modern world. It is foundational to it. The first is nuclear energy, and by extension, the future of European electricity. France generates approximately 70% of its electricity from nuclear power. This is not a legacy position it is trying to exit. It is a deliberate, sustained, and increasingly vindicated strategic choice. EDF, Électricité de France, operates one of the largest nuclear fleets in the world, built over decades with state investment and technical expertise that no other country has replicated at comparable scale. During the energy crisis of 2022 and 2023, when German industry was paying 3 times the American price for electricity and European governments were scrambling to replace Russian gas, France's structural electricity advantage, despite significant short-term maintenance issues with its own fleet, was made newly obvious. The countries that had kept nuclear power were in a fundamentally different position than those that had not. France had kept it. France had the engineers. France had the supply chain, the regulatory framework, the institutional memory, the fuel cycle expertise. And now France is building more. The government has committed to a new generation of EPR2 reactors, large-scale pressurized water reactors designed to replace aging capacity and extend French nuclear dominance for another half-century. At the same time, French companies are leading European development of small modular reactors, a technology that may, within 2 decades, allow nuclear power to be deployed at scales and in locations previously impractical. In a world that has simultaneously decided it needs to decarbonize and accepted that it cannot decarbonize fast enough with renewables alone, France is sitting on an asset that its neighbors are quietly beginning to envy. The second is luxury. But the real story is not the handbags. LVMH is the largest luxury conglomerate in the world, with revenues of approximately 84 billion euros in 2023 and a market capitalization that, at its peak, made Bernard Arnault the wealthiest person on earth. It owns Louis Vuitton, Dior, Givenchy, Bulgari, Tiffany, Moet and Chandon, Hennessy, Sephora, and 60 other brands. Hermès, family-owned, fiercely independent, producing Birkin bags that appreciate faster than most financial assets, has a market capitalization that exceeds the GDP of many European nations. L'Oréal, the world's largest cosmetics company, is French. Kering, which owns Gucci, Saint Laurent, Balenciaga, is French. This concentration of luxury power in a single country is not an accident of culture or history, though culture and history are part of the explanation. It is the result of a specific French industrial model applied to a specific category of goods, the model of the maison, The house, with its accumulated heritage, its geographic specificity, its insistence on craftsmanship, and its absolute refusal to compete on price. France did not build luxury brands. It built institutions that happened to sell beautiful things, and the institutions turned out to be extraordinarily durable. The economic significance goes beyond the revenues. The luxury sector is one of France's largest employers in skilled craftsmanship. It drives tourism. A meaningful fraction of the 89 million international visitors France receives each year come partly because France is, in the global imagination, the capital of this kind of beauty. It generates tax revenue, it supports artisanal supply chains, and it functions as a constant, self-refreshing advertisement for the idea of France as a place where quality is taken seriously. What is less visible, but equally important, is what luxury teaches the rest of the French economy about brand, about patience, about the willingness to invest in intangibles. The lesson that a Hermès scarf is worth more because of what it represents, not only what it is, turns out to be applicable to nuclear technology, to wine, to aerospace, to pharmaceutical regulation, to the French educational system. France, in its best moments, understands that reputation is a productive asset. The third is food, and France's position is more strategic than most people realize. France is the European Union's largest agricultural producer and one of the largest food exporters in the world. It produces wheat, barley, sugar beet, rapeseed, wine, dairy, poultry, and beef at a scale and quality that make it one of the few countries genuinely capable of feeding both itself and significant portions of its neighbors. French wine alone, Bordeaux, Burgundy, Champagne, Alsace, the Rhone Valley, represents a global export category where French producers maintain premium positions that competitors have spent decades trying to undercut and consistently failed. But the strategic importance of French agriculture is not only about what it produces. It is about what it represents in a world where food security is becoming, for the first time in a generation, a genuine political concern. A country that can feed itself is a country that cannot be coerced through supply chains. France, almost uniquely among major European economies, has this capacity. Its agricultural land, 29 million hectares, the largest in the EU, is a strategic reserve in a century when arable land, water, and food production capacity are increasingly treated as geopolitical assets. Sophie Marchand understands this better than most economists. She understands it because she is trying, from her kitchen table in the Auvergne, to build one small piece of the food processing infrastructure that would allow France to capture more of the value its extraordinary agricultural production generates, rather than exporting raw materials and importing finished products. France grows the best ingredients in Europe, she says, and then half of them get turned into finished products somewhere else. It's absurd. It's like mining gold and selling ore. She is not wrong, and the permit is still pending. Here is the tension at the heart of France that Sophie Marchand lives every day. The strategic assets are real. The nuclear fleet is real. The luxury empire is real. The agricultural base is real. The aerospace industry, Airbus, Safran, Thales, Dassault, is real, generating revenues and technological capabilities that make France one of the very few countries capable of building a complete military aircraft from domestic components. The defense industrial base, recently re-energized by the shock of the Ukraine war, is real. The pharmaceutical sector, the railway technology, the water management expertise, the space program, all real, all significant, all frequently overlooked in the discourse about French decline. And yet, France's public debt stands at approximately 110% of GDP and is rising. Its structural deficit, the gap between what the state spends and what it collects, adjusted for the economic cycle, has not been closed in more than 4 decades. Its labor market, despite significant reforms under successive governments, remains one of the most regulated in the OECD, contributing to unemployment rates that have rarely fallen below 7% in living memory, and youth unemployment that has been structurally higher than the European average for a generation. The state that bet on itself so successfully in the post-war decades has also, over time, become very expensive and very slow. The tax burden, total tax revenues as a percentage of GDP, is among the highest in the OECD. The regulatory environment, while less Byzantine than Italy's, imposes compliance costs that fall heaviest on the small and medium enterprises that would normally drive employment growth and economic dynamism. The grandes écoles that produce France's administrative elite also produce a kind of institutional conservatism, a preference for stability, for precedent, for the comfort of proven systems that can make adaptation to new conditions slower than the new conditions require. The social model is not only a cost, it is also an achievement. The French healthcare system, the child care infrastructure, the paid leave provisions, the quality of public education at its best are all genuinely excellent and genuinely valued. But the model was designed for a demographic and economic reality that is changing. An aging population, a shrinking ratio of workers to retirees, and a global environment in which capital and talent are more mobile than they have ever been, are all pressing against a system built for different conditions. The pension crisis of 2023, Emmanuel Macron's decision to raise the retirement age from 62 to 64, and the months of strikes, demonstrations, and political turbulence that followed, was not simply a labor dispute. It was a collision between the mathematical reality of what France can afford and the emotional reality of what the French believe they were promised. That collision has not been resolved. It has been postponed. And then there is the geography of inequality that the post-war model obscured for decades, and that is now impossible to ignore. The France of Paris and Lyon and Bordeaux and the major metropolitan areas, the France of LVMH and Airbus and the grandes écoles, is prosperous, educated, connected, and in many respects, genuinely thriving. The France of the medium-sized cities, the rural departments, the deindustrialized zones, the suburbs where the children of immigrants grew up feeling neither fully French nor fully anything else. This France has a different relationship with the state's promises and the state's performance. The Gilets jaunes, the yellow vest movement that erupted in late 2018 over a fuel tax and became something far larger and more complex, were not primarily angry about the fuel tax. They were angry about the feeling that France's prosperity was produced in places they did not live and distributed in ways that did not reach them. That anger has not dissolved. It has been absorbed, unresolved, into the permanent background noise of French political life. Sophie does not think of herself as part of this story. She is educated, resourceful, and determined. She has options that most people navigating French bureaucracy do not. But she thinks about it sometimes, about what it means that a country with her agricultural assets cannot efficiently connect those assets to the markets that would pay the most for them, and who, specifically, loses when that connection fails. The farmers lose, she says. The communities lose. Young people leave because there's nothing to stay for. And then everyone wonders why the countryside is angry. She pauses. The country has everything it needs. It just can't quite get out of its own way. France is not finished. That sentence, applied to France, carries a weight it does not carry for other countries, because France has been declaring itself finished and being declared finished by others at regular intervals since at least the 17th century, and has consistently proven the declaration premature. There are genuine signs in the current moment that France is doing something more than surviving. The reindustrialization agenda, la réindustrialisation de la France, is not merely a political slogan. Since 2020, France has attracted more foreign industrial investment than any other European country for 3 consecutive years, largely because investors have concluded that a country with cheap nuclear electricity, a large skilled workforce, a central position in the European market, and a government genuinely committed to strategic industrial policy is a better bet than it looked a decade ago. Battery gigafactories, semiconductor facilities, hydrogen infrastructure, green steel, projects that would once have gone to lower-cost locations are choosing France, and choosing it for reasons that have everything to do with the state capacity that France spent decades building and that its rivals are now scrambling to replicate. The defense sector is growing at a pace not seen since the Cold War. Dassault, Thales, Naval Group, KNDS, the companies that build France's military equipment, are hiring, investing, and receiving export orders from a Europe that has suddenly remembered it needs to be able to defend itself. France, almost alone among major European countries, maintained a serious defense industrial base through the post-Cold War decades. It is now, in the most uncomfortable way possible, being vindicated. The nuclear build program, if it proceeds at the pace the government has committed to, will make France not only self-sufficient in low-carbon electricity, but a significant exporter to Germany, which shut down its reactors and now buys French power, to Belgium, to Italy, to a European grid that needs baseload capacity that solar panels and wind turbines cannot provide at every hour of every day. And in the Auvergne, 31 months into her permit process, Sophie Marchand received a phone call last week. The regional development approval has been granted. The fire safety inspection is scheduled for next month. Her lawyer believes the neighboring commune's appeal will be dismissed within 60 days. The facility could be operational by spring. "I'm not celebrating yet," she says. "I've learned not to celebrate anything until the machine is actually running and the first product is actually in a box." She looks out at the plateau. The lentils are in the ground. The cheese cooperatives are waiting. The buyers in Paris and London are waiting. The market is there. It has always been there. France has everything, she says, for perhaps the 100th time since she came back from Zurich. It really does. It just needs to decide to use it. On a Tuesday morning in March, Sophie Marchand drives past the site where her facility is being built. The concrete has been poured. The steel frame is going up. The sign on the fence, required by regulation, lists 14 different approval authorities, each one a department, a service, a body that had to be satisfied before the first stone could be laid. She stops and looks at it for a moment. Around her, the Auvergne Plateau does what it has always done, produces, quietly and without announcement, some of the finest raw ingredients in Europe. In the valley below, a farmer is moving cattle between fields with the unhurried efficiency of someone doing something that has been done in this way, in this place, for 200 years. Above the plateau, 2 fighter jets cross the sky, Rafales, built by Dassault, the most capable combat aircraft in European production, heading east toward an exercise somewhere over the Alps. France is working. Complicated, expensive, exhausting, magnificent France is working. "You know what I think sometimes?" Sophie says, getting back in the car. "I think France doesn't need anyone to believe in it. It's been running this machine for so long it doesn't need the validation." She starts the engine. It just needs to get out of its own way. And occasionally, just occasionally, it does. She drives back toward the village. The steel frame catches the morning light. In Paris, the markets are opening. In Normandy, wheat is being planted in fields that have produced wheat since before the concept of France existed. In Toulouse, engineers are assembling the wing of an Airbus that will carry 300 people across an ocean. In Chinon, in Gravelines, and Palluel, reactors are generating the electricity that will power all of it, quietly, continuously, at a cost per kilowatt hour that France's neighbors are beginning to look at with something very close to envy. The sleeping giant is not asleep. It never was. It was just filling out the paperwork.